This is Rick Gieser. I'm part of the Historical Society and a Carroll Stream Village Board member. And we're here in Mitchell Park. We have some very special guests to chat with today. We have the namesake of Mitchell Park. We have Fred and Shirley Mitchell. Fred Mitchell was the original Park Board president. He was elected in 1964. Thank you for coming back to Carroll Stream.
Well, it's always a pleasure, and thank you for having such delightful weather for us.
It's a great day for this, and I mentioned you were the original Park Board president. You were elected in 1964. What do you remember about that time period?
Well, thinking that that is a half century ago, there's been a lot of water go across the old dam since then, and things get to be a little less clear than they once were. But I'd like to just perhaps give you a little flavor as I recall it from a half a century ago. And I remember very distinctly when I first decided to run for the Carroll Stream Park District. Obviously there was nothing here at the time, but except for the fact that it was obvious that we had a real need and were going to have a growing need for recreational facilities and something associated like a park district before someone else took us over. So I decided to run for the park board, and I can remember distinctly the day of the election, and that evening we went over to Naperville to play some bridge with some very good friends of ours, and I think it was along around 10 o'clock perhaps, or 10:30. I called a member of the committee that was counting the votes and so on and so forth after it was all completed, obviously, just to check and see how the election came out, and she said, well, you won, you were in first place. That surprised me a bit, but delighted me. So following up on that very quickly, since one of the first objects that we had to take care of was the formation of a park board, a president, a vice president, a treasurer, and so on and so forth like that. So I took the initiative and I called everybody that had been elected, and you'll remember the names, I'm sure. Bob Simkus.
Well, they all have parks or facilities named after them.
Well, I know Bob does, a lot of them, and he certainly deserves them. I believe that Jerry Walters does too, if I remember.
He does, at
yeah.
Walters Park.
Yeah, and George Gustopoulos.
Lake George.
Mm-hmm. And all deserving, because I want you to know...
Also Kent Park.
Oh, that's right, Wilbur Kent, sorry about that, Bill. We worked hard, not to say that all your boards haven't worked hard, because you see the product of their endeavors, and I'm amazed. But I want to tell you that perhaps your first park boards were a little bit different than the park boards probably that you have today, and nothing intended. But we had to do it ourselves. We had no superintendent of parks, we had no maintenance people, we had no facilities, we had nothing, except perhaps in the next budget period a little money would be starting to come in. And the first thing that we had to do then was to elect a board. So we did. We had a meeting at my house and took a private throwing of the tiles in the pot and see who was going to come out ahead. And as it so happened, I was elected then as the first president of the board by the then other four members of the trustees. First thing that we had to do besides pass I think it was the first ordinance that we passed as a board, was the actual election of officers. I remember Bob Simkus was elected as the vice president. I think Jerry Walters was the first treasurer, and George Gustopoulos was the first trustee of the police committee for the park district. And I think if any of you knew George, he was an ideal selection for that post. And Wilbur Kent, I forgot what his committee assignments were, but maintenance falls into mind as one of the things that both he and George did, because they seemed to have a very strong inclination towards doing those kinds of things. We had nothing. We had, except, as I said, a known need for some kind of recreational program. So we did the best we could with no money. We did it mostly ourselves for a while. We joined in with the school district, with, you'll recall her name, except I'm having trouble, Johnson.
Elsie Johnson,
Yeah.
who was superintendent of District 93.
That's right. And we went to St. Luke's Parish over here and talked with them. And we went to the Carroll Stream Fire District and any place, and your board, the Carroll Stream Board, and every place we could go to solicit whatever help we could get to get something started. So Elsie very quickly jumped into the fray and offered us some facilities to meet in, and and that's really what we needed for starters. And the fire district, we decided that winter we wanted to, with St. Luke's permission, put in dig a ice skating rink. Hopefully we'd have some good cold weather and it'd freeze some ice and the kids could come and skate there. Well, as it so happened, it worked out that way, and we were able to get a tractor from a local contractor, and he came in with his tractor and dug out the facility at St. Luke's, which gave us permission to do that. And the fire district came in and filled it full of water, and as fortune would have it, we had a very cold winter that year, and it had lots of ice, and we had lots of people skating on the first formal facility of the Carroll Spring Park District, recreational facility of the Park District. From there we had not much, but we quickly took on Tony Pecorelli as the first attorney to the Park District. If any of you knew Tony, he was a wonderful guy, and I think he was on the state's attorney's board or something, but he had some influence, let's say. So, and we took on I cannot recall her name, the Architectural and Planning Corporation, which we wanted to get recommendations in for what we might be able to do in terms of a first recreational and office facility. Going to the bottom of the barrel on that one, it worked out, we thought, very, very nicely, and that became the creation of Alderman Park, and a facility that withstood the ravages of time until it was demolished and made room for, I take it, a floodplain.
You mentioned Aldrin and the Aldrin facility and Armstrong Park, Collins Pool. Since you brought that up, what prompted you to name it after the ice, and so soon after the landing on the moon?
Very close. Well, that probably was one of the things that helped in that. But we were hassled with several things, and forgive me, but I don't recall much what they were at this point. But about an hour and a half into that meeting, I said, you know, I had an idea, because I have a little interest in that. And what would you think of naming it after the astronauts that just went to the moon? Well, it didn't take everybody long to agree that was a good idea. And so that's how it happened. Not very formal, but everybody agreed that was something that should be commemorated and last for a lifetime.
Well, that was, the moon landing was early July of '69. You made the resolution and the approval in a little bit later, a couple weeks later in that month, so it could be argued those were one of the first facilities named after and honoring the astronauts in the country.
Good question, because it was. Now I have a hard time recollection on that, but I believe it was, if it wasn't the first, it was one of the first. I'm sure there was some governmental stuff in there maybe, but we had a letter from the, and I can't remember the name of the organization that sent it to us, but it was NASA, I guess, thanking us. We sent them a copy of the ordinance and so on and so forth, thanking us for doing so. And I do believe it's stated in there that if we weren't the first, we were one of the first. So you might look that up. I don't have a copy of it.
Yeah, that's something we'll have to look up. Can we go back a few years, back to the formation? The formation of the park was really, the goal to create a park was started when Glendale Heights started to annex into their park district the industrial park of Carroll Stream.
That's correct.
What do you remember from that? Was that a goal? Were you involved with the process?
No, I was not actually involved with that process, although I was very aware of the overriding situation that you had of the takeover by them of lots of territory. And that certainly entered into the overall reason why we at that time was undertaken to form a park district, was in defense of that occurring.
Well, it was in 1963, Glendale Heights tried to annex that property, and a group of citizens, including members of the village board and then village president Rodney Dusterhoff, was very involved in taking it to court. The judge ruled on a technicality in the paperwork for Glendale Heights and allowed Carroll Stream to go to the voters to create a park district, which then led to your election as well.
Well, I was not personally involved in the creation of going for having the vote to do this. I was just presented as were the rest of the people, as a person to run for it. Well, I requested, obviously I had to request a ballot for the election, but I was not priorly involved with that, other than I did go to board meetings and things like that and was aware of the goings on. That's about all I can tell you about that.
Well, we're chatting with Fred Mitchell, the original park board president. Here we're at the park named in his honor, Mitchell Park. We're talking about the early days of the park district. And you were also one of the early residents of the village.
That is correct.
Why don't we bring in your wife Shirley as well?
Well, I was going to do that.
Yeah. You told me that you were the 18th family to move into Carroll Stream. Tell us about what it was like in those early days. Were the streets even paved when you moved into your home?
Well, yes, they were. The streets were paved. Huh?
Yes, they were.
No, I thought you said no. The streets were paved in that part
On Mohawk.
On Mohawk, and I think on
Black Hawk
Black
and
Hawk.
Tomahawk.
And Tomahawk was paved around. Quite a bit of that area out there was paved. That was the first, obviously, section to be, and when I said we were the 18th, they weren't all down there in a little group. They were, I think, the street across the street was there, and several of them, including Dick Ferguelli, who was then
the police chief.
And you may well be looking at the first deputy of Dick Ferguelli's. Not formally, I was never elected as a police officer, but we spent a lot of time together, and I can think of more than one occasion when Dick would get a call, we'd be playing pinochle or something like that in his house, and the phone would ring, and of course it would be an accident up to Gary in '64. And on a couple of occasions I had to put on a hat and go up there with him and help direct traffic. But anyway.
Were you part of the volunteer fire department?
No.
No. Now, living in the village where very few people were at that time in the early days, many of the husbands of the era would be off. What was it like during during the daytime hours, Shirley, when basically just the children and wives would be around.
Right. Well, we got together for coffee. We pretty much knew everybody on Mohawk at that time. And we'd get together. And of course, we all had small children. And we watched them.
Now, you mentioned Police Chief Ferguelli.
Right.
Do you remember, either of you remember, the story goes that the first squad car was a pink squad car?
No,
Do you remember that?
I don't remember that.
No, that doesn't tell me anything.
Okay, well, according to, in Jean Moore's book,
Well, we remember Jean Moore.
she discussed how it was that Jay Stream told her that it was a pink squad car. Nobody seems to remember that, though. So it may have been the miss of time.
It could be. I haven't heard that story, but not that I should have.
Right. Now, Shirley, you were also involved in the early days of the Park District as well as the first secretary.
Right.
Fred was saying there was no office, so the office was basically your dining room table?
Well, we had a family room and a desk, and I worked there until the community center opened. And then I worked there until late 1970. And then I got a job with Illinois Bell full-time. And then Barb O'Reilly took over. But I worked in Aldrin Community Center for quite a while. And I went to the meetings and took notes when the board met.
Let me tell you one other bit of trivia in relationship to that. The desk we had in our den was a donation by Illinois Bell Telephone Company. It was one of those old 1920s wooden desks. I mean, you couldn't blow it up with a stick of dynamite.
Yeah,
Great desk, but we had that monster in our dining room, or in our den. And when Shirley took her first formal job, for a while she was working for nothing, but when she was elected by the board as first secretary, we gathered to decide on a salary. And being the conservative group that we were, we decided that we'd make one exception, and that would be for Shirley, so we opted for $2.25 an hour. And so she worked her full term for $2.25 an hour for the Park District. And let me tell you, you got a bargain, guys. And when it came time for her re-election as secretary, we decided we would reward her and increased her pay by 10%, which gave her a $2.50 pay. So you got your money's worth with Shirley. And she enjoyed the job. I just thought I'd pass that on for whatever.
Well, that's a great story. Now, you currently live in Arizona?
right.
How often do you make it back to the village?
Not as often as we would like.
We were here in October, but before that it was a couple years.
What are your thoughts of the changes of Carroll Stream through the years?
Well,
Well, I can't believe they tore down the community center and the swimming pool.
well, let me put it to you. From my frame, I agree with Shirley. But I had my son, who I think I mentioned, Fred, has lived here his whole since
he grew up here.
Since he started school here, grade school here, and he still resides here over in Easton. And anyway, so I had him drive me around this time, and he took me over to the park. And I'm honest to God, and I think about it now, I want to cry. And I understand what's going on and how it had to be done. If you don't think that did really quell them off your rock, see that big stack of dirt over there. But hey, I know it has to be done. And the facility you have over here, I have not really been in it, but I've been by it, and I thought Simca Center was super. This is a super. But anyway, that's my reaction to your work going on down in the park.
Well, we're here with Shirley and Fred Mitchell in Mitchell Park, discussing the early days of the village and the early days of the Park District. They have come to town from Arizona. I want to thank you both for joining us for a few minutes today and sharing your recollections. Thank you for coming back.
Well, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
I'm surprised I can remember that far back.
Well, your information is very important to the future generations of Carroll Stream residents. So Carroll Stream is very lucky in that so many of the founders, so many of the people who created the entities of the village are still around, such as yourself. So thank you for sharing your knowledge.